It's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis, this is Red Eye Radio.
Thank you very much for joining us on Red Eye Radio. 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Heading into a Thanksgiving weekend. Hope you are doing well. You can find out more about me on the Dan Mandis Show Facebook page. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter as well. I host a morning show on Super Talk 99.7 WTN in Nashville, Tennessee. A long time ago, I don't know how long it was, but it feels like at least a couple of years, I referred to President Joe Biden as Bubble Wrap Biden, and there was a reason for that. The reason I referred to the president as Bubble Wrap Biden is because, and this I think goes back to the campaign, where the media was doing everything that they possibly could to protect Bubble Wrap Biden. And it was so obvious what they were doing. Because when he came out and he said, if you don't know whether to vote for me or Trump, then you ain't black. You remember that whole thing? And how there was a lot of the members of the media that just virtually ignored that story. And I thought, you know, it's like they've got him surrounded, covered in bubble wrap. They're doing everything they can to protect him. And, you know, that, of course, goes into the laptop from hell and how the media deemed it not credible when now we know that it certainly was. And I knew that it was credible right from the very beginning, as did a lot of you, because you listen to talk radio. But the media did everything, and social media did everything to protect Bubble Wrap Biden. And I must have said that for quite some time until, quite frankly, I got bored with it and moved on. But imagine my surprise when I saw this headline. This is from Fox News, but it was everywhere yesterday. The headline, Bubble Wrap Strategy Needed to Protect Biden from Age Concerns, according to some Democrats. Yes, so now the White House actually has their own strategy, and it is Operation Bubble Wrap Biden. Holy cow. I'd love to take credit, but I won't. I don't want any credit when it comes to anything regarding the Biden administration, even when it's in a negative connotation. But think about this. Because what they're trying to do, and I don't know how they do this. I don't know how they bubble wrap Biden safely away from these concerns about his age. Because he's old. And by the way, he's taken, 39% of his first term in office, hopefully his only term. 39% of it has been on vacation. You won't hear too many of the media outlets these days reporting on that. But here's the story from Fox News. President Biden may need, quote, a bubble wrap strategy to protect him for the rest of the 2024 campaign, some Democrats are now readily admitting. There was a story in the New York Times that was followed up by a story in the New York Post, Fox News as well. New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker reported on comments from, quote, current and former administration officials on the strategy to handle concerns over Biden's age ahead of his 81st birthday this week. Biden, currently the oldest person ever to serve as president of the United States, turned 81 years old on Monday. If he is reelected, Biden would be 86 years old upon leaving office. How much bubble wrap would you need to protect Joe Biden from concerns about his age? Because obviously what you would have to do is lock the man up, please, lock the man up and not allow him to speak or really do much of anything except maybe cut the occasional ribbon. But the reality is that President Biden is, not only is he old at the age of 81, but also He's got the mind of like an 87, 88, 89-year-old. Because Donald Trump isn't really, let's be honest, Donald Trump isn't all that far behind. But Trump is sharp than a tack. Certainly sharper than Joe Biden. While some told Baker the president needed to start getting out on the campaign trail more to show his vigor. You know what, I read that and some of these Democrats talk about this, his vigor. You see Biden when he does that silly little Biden jog where he tries to, jog into a room, jog out of a room. The reality is 2 or 3 little fake jog steps are not going to convince the American people of his vigor, of his stamina, or his mental acuity. Because it is clear that the man has no vigor. It is clear the man has no stamina. It is clear the man has no mental acuity. He just does not. So they want him out on the campaign trail to show his vigor, deploy more humor to diffuse the matter, and even boast about his age rather than ignore it. Steer into the train wreck is what I always say. Steer into the train wreck. But the problem is that he doesn't have the ability to steer into that train wreck because he doesn't have the mental acuity to do so. I mean, he might be good for one line, but the bottom line is that the man is showing his age, and there's no amount of bubble wrap that will hide it. And the American people know that. And that's why in poll after poll after poll, it shows that there is a concern about Joe Biden's age. But see, here's the thing that I keep saying, is that his mental acuity, his vigor, and his stamina wouldn't matter if his policies were working. But his policies are not working. And the American people know that. And so Operation Bubble Wrap, whether or not this is going to be a success or not, I can't see how this is going to help. I mean, can we all be honest? The president, he really hasn't been out there all that much to begin with. He simply hasn't. They say that there's some that want him out on the campaign trail. Others, they say, however, says the president need to be protected even more, allowing more time to rest and not sent on so many draining international trips. What some cheekily are now calling the bubble wrap strategy, as in encasing the president in bubble wrap for the next 12 months to make sure he does not trip and fall. That can be verbally, that can also be physically. I mean, let's face it, the president, when he opens his mouth and he starts speaking, he trips. He will verbally trip. And he fails miserably oftentimes when he tries to speak. A recent NBC poll indicates that 59% of registered voters have major concerns about Biden's physical and mental health as he eyes his second term, with an additional 27% having either moderate or minor concerns. But again, at least for me, it's not about Biden's age necessarily. It's about what he's done to the country, not for the country, but to the country. Meantime, former President Donald Trump, possibly future President Donald Trump, you never really know these days, he released a video earlier today.
Next November, you have a choice between war, poverty, and weakness under crooked Joe Biden, or peace, prosperity, and strength under President Donald J. Trump. Just 3 years ago, our economy was booming, the world was safe, and America was strong.
You folks, some of you have heard me before, some of you have not, and I have proudly declared myself as a free agent. So I don't want you to think that I am just automatically in the tank for Donald Trump, because I'm not. In the Republican primary, I am a free agent. I know who I'm not going to vote for, and I know who I am looking at as far as folks that I would vote for. And right now, my big two are Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. There's some aspects of Nikki Haley that I like, but for whatever reason, I don't feel as passionately about her as I do Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. And frankly, DeSantis has disappointed on the campaign trail. But I don't want you to think that I'm a guy that is automatically out there trying to sell Donald Trump's narrative. He can do that himself. And when he just spoke about the economy under his administration, his first 4 years, and the accomplishments that he was able to achieve during his first 4 years, America was in a far better place from a foreign policy standpoint to an economic standpoint to a southern border, illegal immigration standpoint. We were a lot better off. And you don't have to be a diehard, strident Trump supporter to understand that. And more people are understanding. When you put it through the lens of a Biden administration, how good we were under Donald Trump. Like him or not. Hate his tweets or not. The man delivered. Now, you may disagree with some of the things that he did. And let's face it, no president is perfect. And you're not going to agree with everything that they do. You're not going to agree with everything that they say or tweet. There's some stuff about Donald Trump that I don't like and that I didn't like. But you can't ignore that by and large, he's got scoreboard. And he did talk about the economy in this video. He talked about mortgage rates in this video again that he released a few hours ago. He spoke about the cost of groceries and gas as well, all of which, mortgage rates, interest rates, the price of groceries and gas, all of those things have gone up under Joe Biden. And he continued to talk about how the world right now is in flames.
I was also the first president in decades who didn't start a war, and I brought our troops back home. We defeated ISIS, and that was it. Everybody came back home where they should be. Yep. Under crooked Joe Biden, the economy is in a shambles, and the world is going up in flames.
Yeah, and we do have some news on Israel and Hamas coming up. And one other soundbite from Donald Trump. It's about a 6-minute video. The next soundbite that I'm going to play is the one that is truly making headlines, and I've got that for you straight ahead. The phone number is 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis here. This is Red Eye Radio.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Appreciate you being here heading into a Thanksgiving weekend. So former President Donald Trump releasing a video earlier today, last night, however you want to say it. But, you know, one of the things that he says to Joe Biden, he says, all right, so Joe, if you want to meet up on the campaign trail, he would absolutely love to do it. And basically the former president saying, bring it on.
So if Crooked Joe wants to turn this election into a question of which candidate will defend our democracy and freedom, then I say, bring it on. Let's go, Joe, bring it on, because you are a corrupt person. You're the most corrupt president in our history. And by the way, the most incompetent president in our history. Because Americans don't like tyrants, we don't like fascists, we don't like communists, and we don't like crooked Joe Biden. You just have to look at the polls.
Yeah, and listen, when you look at those polls, they show, and I don't need to go through all of the many polls that are out there with Joe Biden about where Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley would all beat Joe Biden if the election were held today. But listen to this. Because Trump kept calling Joe Biden Crooked Joe. 6 in 10 Americans believe that Joe Biden participated in son Hunter Biden's business deals in, they say, Daily Mail Another dire poll for the president as Republicans zero in on their impeachment investigation. 81%. Republicans were more likely than Democrats, of course, to believe that Joe Biden was involved in his son's business dealings. 81% to 39%. By the way, how is this even possible? 24%. This is what's wrong with America. 24% of the American people have a favorable read on Hunter Biden, a favorable opinion on Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden. Now, what do you think of when you think of Hunter Biden? Crack cocaine. How many thousands of pictures of himself did he take naked? Of course, addictions, prostitutes, all of the things that he has done regarding drugs, again, the addictions and so forth, not to mention the crooked business deals. So I think those the 24% who view Hunter Biden favorable are probably the same ones that are smoking the same crack as he does, or maybe did. Because I don't see how anybody can have a favorable opinion of a guy who has all of those proclivities and he's corrupt. And it is so obvious if you look at the evidence that he is corrupt. But yet somehow 24% of these folks out there view him favorably. Now, note, 55% have an unfavorable rating. 37% viewing him as very unfavorable. But the 24% that view Hunter favorably, I think that those are just the never Trumpers, the never Republicans, the always Democrat, the always Biden folks. That's the only thing that I can think of. But when Donald Trump, again, calling crooked Joe Biden crooked Joe, 6 in 10 Americans believe that that's true. And at the very least, you can say that Joe Biden lied to the American people. Because remember when he said, and I don't have the soundbite handy, but you folks have heard it 1,000 times, when Joe Biden came out during the debate back then in 2020, and he said that Hunter has made no money doing business with China, and that his son never told him about his overseas business dealings, when there is clear evidence out there that, yes, as a matter of fact, Joe and Hunter Biden did work together. And so when the former president talking about the polling, there really is, if you're Joe Biden, there really is nowhere to rest your eyes. You can run to Nantucket over the Thanksgiving holiday. You can sleep the days away on the beach. But you know what? You simply cannot escape the polls. Oh, by the way, I'm going to try to do this in the next half hour. James Rosen. I don't know if you've heard this audio from James Rosen, but he did something incredible with Karine Jean-Pierre, because they were talking about the polling, and I don't want to do an entire evening of polling talk, but what I will tell you is that how James Rosen just very eloquently and with precision asked Karine Jean-Pierre, I call her Cringe, not Corinne, Karine Jean-Pierre, he asked her about the polling and does the White House take the polling that they see out there seriously? Her answer is something that you have got to hear, and that is coming up right here on Red Eye Radio. Some of the other stories that we're following. Media Matters is being sued by Elon Musk. That story for you, and a whole lot more straight ahead. The phone number is 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339.
Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios. Now, for Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, here is Dan Mandis.
866-90 Red Eye is the phone number, 866-907-3339. All right, so James Rosen, one of my favorite White House reporters, and rarely does Cringe Jean-Pierre call on him because, let's just face it, I mean, he way outmatches Cringe when it comes to intelligence and wits and so forth. And so he was asking about, we opened up the hour talking about some of the polling that is out there today and over the past week or so. And I've been sharing some of that with you. And the polling is not good. The polling is simply not good for the president. And so Rosen, opened up the questioning. It was about a 5 or 6 minute dialogue between Cringe Jean-Pierre and James Rosen. And he did ask about that polling.
I want to ask about polling. In February, the president conducted an interview with, I believe it was Telemundo, and he was asked about the dismal state of his job approval ratings. And he answered in words to this effect, do you know anyone that believes the polling these days? And he talked in some detail about the difficulty of getting people on the phone and compiling accurate polling. Whenever you're asked about the president's dismal job approval ratings, you say we're not going to look at polls. We look at his accomplishments. And yet when you are asked about various domestic policy initiatives, you will say these poll very well. People support what the president wants to do. If you look at the individual subjects on the polling, they support what the president's agenda is. So once and for all, are only certain polls valid in your eyes, the ones that support your agenda? Or is the polling data that shows that President Biden has been stuck for 2 years at the low 40s in his approval ratings, are those valid?
Ever since the disastrous pullout of Afghanistan, the president has not done well in the polling. And it has been a polling spiral for the last couple of years. And so whether it is, and he's absolutely right, by the way, James Rosen is absolutely right. The Democrats oftentimes, especially those within Joe Biden's inner circle, they'll dismiss the polling. Yet what they will say is that, as James Rosen just pointed out, if it's something having to do with an individual policy, then they'll say, well, the polling is really good on that. Is polling very well? Well, you can't have it both ways. That's number one. And number two, it depends on how the questions are asked. Because there are things that the president has done that may not necessarily be popular with the American people, but if the question is asked in a certain way, it may give the perception that the American people are appreciating what the president has done. But when you see, and here's the thing, I don't necessarily pay attention to one poll or even two polls, but when the polling is basically all the same, and it shows that the president is underwater in just about every standard, by just about every standard, the economy, immigration, foreign policy, militarily, COVID, I mean, Donald Trump said in the audio that I played for you earlier, and I agree with him, that I don't know if we've ever seen a president that has been so abysmal on all of these issues. I mean, congratulations, Jimmy Carter, you're no longer the worst. And so Rosen asks the question of Cringe Jean-Pierre, and she spends the next 2 minutes going on and on about how the polling does matter.
Well, here's the thing. I think it's important to share that American people do approve of some of the president's initiative. I think it is important. I think it's important for the American people.
I mean, she goes on and on and on. But see, again, here's the thing. She says, well, it's important to point out and note that the American people do approve of the president's initiatives. Well, by and large, they don't, because look at the polling, where you see the president, as I mentioned, he is underwater in everything. And so you can bloviate all you want.
Speak on what the American people want to hear.
Cringe Jean-Pierre. You know what the American people want to hear? You just heard her say that? What the American people want to hear? The American people want to hear that Joe Biden is not running again. But you know what I would say? I would say, because I know that there's, a lot of talk show hosts out there who will say, well, Joe Biden needs to be impeached. And we could talk about that all day long, but here's the thing. I've made the decision that I would much rather see Joe Biden running against whoever the Republican is than Gavin Newsom. Because it is Biden that is doing horribly in the polling, not Gavin Newsom. And so Joe Biden has a record. He's got a record of his legislation, the things that he signed, the executive orders, and the failures. That's what I want the Republicans to run against. Gavin Newsom doesn't have any of that. And the other thing is, and my audience in Nashville who listen to me on Super Talk 99.7 WTN, folks have heard me say this before, where if you look at Gavin Newsom and you look at his ability to debate, you look at his ability to defend the state of California, he is somebody who can, at the very least, put up a very good argument, even if you don't believe him, even if you disagree with him. Joe Biden is simply unable to form a coherent thought. That's the bigger issue. So while I may agree that, for the president, what he has not done, which is protecting our southern border, you could talk about whether or not that is a high crime and misdemeanor. You can talk about, all of the allegations from Hunter Biden's laptop. You could talk about, the money coming from China. Is Joe Biden on the take? Is Joe Biden a president who very well could be blackmailed? Does President Xi Jinping know where all the bodies are buried within the Biden administration? Does he have all the receipts and all of these other things that are the accusations of the Republicans? By and large, Joe Biden is going to have to answer for all of those things. And does he deserve to be impeached? Perhaps. I mean, I say yes. But I think that if Donald Trump is the nominee, then he's going to have a far easier time defeating Joe Biden based on his record and Joe Biden's inability to, by and large, form a coherent thought that gives Donald Trump the edge. And so you just heard Cringe Jean-Pierre and what she has to say about all of this. James Rosen, by the way, did respond, and he said, okay, so does the polling matter or not?
The polls that show that the electorate at large and also significant majorities within the Democratic Party believe that the president is too old. The polls that show the American people and also significant majorities within the Democratic Party don't want him to run again. And the polls that show his handling of the economy, foreign policy, all of these dismal polls, his job approval ratings, does the White House have any basis to challenge the accuracy of that polling?
I'm not challenging the accuracy here. That's not what I'm doing.
Yeah, but Biden
what I'm
did.
saying to you is that, we're not going to change the minds of Americans. I get that. Americans are going to feel how they feel, and we're going to respect that. And I've said that many times from here. Many times. I said that moments ago. What I can tell you is what our perspective is. What I can tell you is how we see things. And we believe experience, this president having experience to get things done is important. And we know that it's going to take some time, right, for Americans to feel what we have been able to do in this administration.
Yeah, I'm sort of laughing when she says it's going to take the American people some time to, feel what this administration has been doing. Oh, no, we feel it, and we have been. From those that lost their jobs because of the vaccine mandates to the economy and everything in between. Let's see here. Edward, by the way, the phone lines are open, 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Edward is in Tampa on Red Eye Radio. Thanks for calling in, Edward. Go ahead.
Yeah, Dan. So I listen to all kinds of media, Spanish, the European news, and they never asked the president, you were the one that first started sending these illegals around the country. everybody wants to think it was the governors of Florida and Texas. They never ask him about his stumbles when he goes up the airplane or his gaffes when he's giving speeches. It's so biased.
Well, it has been for a long time, and we were talking in one of the previous segments, and thank you, Edward, for calling, where inside the Biden administration now there's Operation Bubble Wrap Biden, and Edward, that's exactly what I was talking about. Where and there's been times where I will listen to some of these interviews, some of these one-on-one interviews with the president, you know, ABC News, NBC News, CBS, exclusive interview with Joe Biden. And it's just a bunch of softball piece of crap questions. And no follow-up. That's the thing that drives me crazy. Edward, you've triggered me. That's the thing that drives me nuts. It's like they'll say, you know, hey, President Biden, let's talk about, the issues on the southern border. And he'll give some absolute BS answer, and they just let him get away with it. You know how the media should treat Joe Biden when they get their exclusive interviews? And by the way, just so you know, when ABC or CBS or NBC or CNN or MSNBC, when any of these BS news organizations, when they get these exclusive interviews with the president, there are agreements in place that they won't ask about Hunter Biden. They won't ask or have the follow-up questions regarding the economy, regarding the polling, regarding the border, regarding whatever it might be. They'll allow the president to basically read from the teleprompter, read from the press release, and then they move on. I mean, I've got a great example where when I forget who the interview was with, but I remember that Biden was being in the Biden administration. I know that you remember this. They were being interviewed about Iran and how Iran has been and continues to fund terrorism, whether it is Hamas, whether it's Hezbollah, you name it, Iran funds it as far as terrorism goes. And so when you've got Antony Blinken and Joe Biden and Karine Jean-Pierre saying, well, yeah, but they're not allowed to use the lifted sanctions for anything other than humanitarian purposes. And then you've got Iran and the leaders of Iran saying, no. We'll use that money for anything that we want. And then you go down the road of looking the other way on sanctions, which is what the Biden administration did to allow Iran to bring in tens of billions of dollars in essentially illegal oil sales. And there's no follow-up to any of those questions. It's just the answer to the question from the Biden administration is, well, they're not allowed to use the money for anything other than humanitarian purposes. And then the follow-up question is exactly what I just stated, which is, what about looking the other way on the sanctions, which has brought in tens of billions of dollars in illegal oil sales? What about the fact that Iran says they'll use that money for whatever it is that they want to use it for? There's no follow-up. That is all part of Operation Bubble Wrap Biden from the media's standpoint. And Edward, I appreciate your call. 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. This is Dan Mandis on Red Eye Radio.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90-RED-EYE.
Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. One of my favorite audio bites of the day is Jamal Bowman on why the apparently vast majority of black voters are leaving the Democrat Party.
People of color have been turned off for a while, because of lack of comprehensive immigration reform if you're talking about the Latino community,
right,
and no conversation at all about reparations if you're talking about the black community. But we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year on weapons and war, but we can't even have a conversation about reparations?
They've had conversations about reparations. Now, first of all, his opinion literally does not matter, because he can't tell the difference between a fire alarm and a door handle. But beyond that, the conversation has been had. But let's also not forget that the Democrats, they have had majorities in Congress and also the White House. And so there has been plenty of times to have those conversations. Jamal?
Top of the Hour News is brought to you by House Products. Visit houseproducts.com.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One. Now, it's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis, this is Red Eye Radio.
866-90 Red Eye is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Gary and Eric, they return next Sunday night, Monday morning. I host a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Media matters. Anyone who has ever listened to talk radio, listened to the great ones like Mark Levin, Rush Limbaugh, of course, Gary and Eric, and, you know, the great conservative voices of our time. Sean Hannity is another one. We all know very well, Dr. Laura Schlesinger, we all know very well what Media Matters does. What Media Matters, they're an organization. They're, in my opinion, they're parasites. I mean, they go after conservatives. They go after free speech because they are as, in my opinion, as un-American as you can get, because they target conservatives and they target free speech. And so what they do, what Media Matters does, is they go after, they'll take little snippets or whatever, and they'll take them completely out of context, and then they'll go to advertisers of some of these various shows. This was a famous battle between Rush Limbaugh and Media Matters, because they would take snippets of his show and they would take them completely out of context. Then they would go to, Rush's advertisers, and they would try to convince the advertisers that their show was in the middle of a bunch of hate-filled monologues. But one of the things that the advertisers no doubt noticed is that, well, it's interesting that, we take our advertising off of, for example, Rush Limbaugh's show, and guess what? We're not getting near the results that we once did. Oh, and by the way, let's take a deeper dive and look at, in full context, some of the things that people like Rush Limbaugh and some of the other folks were saying, and were the comments that Media Matters presented to some of these various outlets, some of these various advertisers and businesses and so forth, and were the comments taken out of context? And oftentimes they were. But this has been a battle that has been going on for years and years and years and years between talk radio, conservative voices, and Media Matters. And it is just something that, by and large, talk radio has had to deal with. And by the way, the ACLU, as far as I'm concerned, is nowhere to be found. Well, now we have a brand new Media Matters controversy, as Elon Musk has now brought what he is saying is a thermonuclear lawsuit against Media Matters, because his accusation is that Media Matters misrepresented what is happening on Twitter. Because let's face it, Twitter, they were part of, the whole censorship campaign that has been going on for a long time before Elon Musk bought Twitter and basically opened up the floodgates of free speech. And Media Matters doesn't like that. And there's a lot of Americans, by the way, Democrats, that don't like that either. Because they like to control everything, especially narrative. And so when it came to Twitter, pre-Elon Musk, when it came to a lot of the social media companies out there, they were ever so protective of the narrative of the Democrats, whether they were talking about COVID or the laptop from hell. We could go on and on about the censorship of conservatives on social media. Donald Trump, we all know what happened to him when he got bounced off of Twitter. But now someone is fighting back, and that someone is Elon Musk. After a slew, this is from Fox News, after a slew of advertisers, including IBM, Apple, Disney, Lionsgate, and Paramount, fled Twitter, X, Elon Musk pledged to hit the watchdog group with a thermonuclear lawsuit. And so what Media Matters, the accusation is, and this is, again, how Fox News puts it. I'll explain this. Media Matters published a report on Friday accusing Twitter of placing ads next to white nationalist hashtags. However, Elon Musk believes that the group completely misrepresented the real user experience in order to mislead advertisers. Now, basically, what the accusation is that Media Matters opened up some accounts and they followed basically a whole bunch of hate groups and a whole bunch of, hateful hashtags and white supremacy hashtags and so forth. And they manipulated the algorithms in that way so that they would only follow these hate groups. And then they took screenshots when all of this hateful stuff came up on that particular feed, and these posts were accompanied and appeared next to the ads for all of the companies that I just mentioned. And then they took those screenshots and they presented those to the companies and they said, look what's happening on X. Look what your brand is appearing next to. They completely, according to Elon Musk, they completely misrepresented what is actually happening on Twitter or X. And Elon Musk says that he can prove it, and I believe that he can. And now the Texas Attorney General enters the equation. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is opening up an investigation into Media Matters for, quote, potential fraudulent activity after ex-CEO Elon Musk accusing the left-wing media watchdog group of manipulating data on the social media platform. Republican Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey posted on Sunday that his legal team was also looking into the matter. Now Ken Paxton is launching an official investigation with his office after being extremely troubled by the allegations. He says, and this is a quote, "We are examining the issue closely to ensure that the public has not been deceived by the schemes of radical left-wing organizations who would like nothing more than to limit freedom by reducing participation in the public square." Because let's face it, if you take away the advertisers on Twitter or X, then you are limiting the ability of Twitter or X to continue. And this is something that happened after Elon Musk opened up Twitter to, by and large, free speech. The Texas Attorney General's office saying this: under the Texas Business Organizations Code and the Deceptive Trade Practices Act, the OAG will vigorously enforce against nonprofits who commit fraudulent acts in or affecting the state of Texas. So there's a lot to this story, and this is going to be really interesting because there have been a lot of people that have been trying to prove what Media Matters does for years. Last week, Musk found himself in hot water after commenting on a post on X that critics believe was anti-Semitic. Since then, the tech billionaire has clarified that anyone posting genocidal content will be suspended from X. He says, at the risk of stating the obvious, anyone advocating the genocide of any group will be suspended from this platform, Musk wrote on X. And it goes on, but the bottom line is that is what Media Matters has been accused of. And so you can talk about whatever it is that Elon Musk said was taken out of context. To me, the story is about Media Matters and what they've been trying to do to talk radio for years and years. Now, in my opinion, this is a related story. What is going on in the state of New York and New York Governor Kathy Hochul, who now is basically trying to control information, or as she likes to say, disinformation. Listen.
Today I'm directing the Director of Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services to develop media literacy tools for K through 12 in our public schools. This will teach students and even teachers to help understand how to spot conspiracy theories and misinformation, disinformation, and online hate. Start talking about what we're seeing out there.
So
give the teachers the tools they need to help these conversations in school.
You know, one of the things that I would say, because she was talking about how to spot disinformation, how to spot conspiracy theories. I don't need to tell you how many conspiracy theories have ultimately ended up turning out to be true. I mean, do I need to go down the list? Jussie Smollett, for one. Remember that whole stupid story with old Jussie Smollett? I remember when, and this is a minor example, and I'll get into the major examples here in a minute, but I remember when that whole story came out where he said that a couple of Trump supporters, he's out there walking around Chicago, the coldest night of the year, and he's walking around, I guess, looking for a sandwich, and he gets attacked by a couple of Donald Trump supporters who just happened to have a couple of bottles of bleach and a noose and attacked him. And I remember at the time, I was on the air and I said, after I figured out who Jussie Smollett was, I said, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, who the heck is walking around Chicago at, early morning hours when it's really cold outside looking for food? And then happens along a couple of guys who just happen to have bleach and a noose. This doesn't make any sense. And I had some people sending me nasty grams on Twitter and emails and so forth. How dare you question Jussie Smollett? How dare you question the victim? You must be a racist. I bet you have bleach and nooses in your car. Just all this. And as you know, it turned out that old Juicy was lying, and I was right. But people said it was a conspiracy theory. People said you were victim shaming and victim blaming if you said at the time that his story just seems a little sus. Well, how many times have we been called racist and conspiracy theorists for saying that COVID came from the Chinese lab? And now it turns out, looks like that was true. Remember when they said that, saying that, Donald Trump did not collude with Russia? That you were just some sort of a Trump sycophant and just refused to believe that Donald Trump did anything wrong? And they were absolutely certain that Donald Trump did collude with Russia, and it turned out that was not true. The laptop from hell, they said was Russian disinformation, and you were viscerally attacked if you said otherwise. You were censored on Twitter, as a matter of fact, and some of these other social media platforms. Turns out that was true, that the laptop from hell was a credible story. It was not Russian disinformation. They censored you if you were standing up for Donald Trump and saying that Donald Trump did not collude with Russia. They also said the vaccines were perfectly safe, when we now know that people are suffering side effects. Nothing but a bunch of conspiracy theories, they said. Well, in reality, a lot of these things turned out to be, if you were somebody who was either questioning the narrative, defending Donald Trump, defending conservatism, then you were called anything from a conspiracy theorist to a hate monger to a racist, etc. And so when Kathy Hochul says that they're doing whatever they can to, quote unquote, battle disinformation, battle and spot conspiracy theories, well, according to who? Kathy Hochul, according to who? Because my definition oftentimes of a conspiracy theory is something that is eventually proven to be true or correct. And we've seen that time and time and time again. They want to control the narrative.
And by teaching younger New Yorkers about how to discern between digital fact and digital fiction, we can better inoculate them from hatred and the spread of it.
Okay.
And help prepare them for a very fast-moving and often confusing world.
Well, again, the more you listen to Kathy Hochul and the more you hear that they're trying to battle disinformation and battle conspiracy theories, I would say that oftentimes it is the left and it is the mainstream media. They are the purveyors of disinformation. I mean, that's why I am so excited that the January 6th tapes are now being released by Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. And you've got all of this hand-wringing by some Republicans, all Democrats, and many in the mainstream media, as I would say most in the mainstream media. And I think the reason why they're hand-wringing over this is because they are afraid that their narrative will be completely debunked. I've got more on that in a minute. 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. This is Dan Mandis on Red Eye Radio.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis here in for Gary and Eric. I've got a question for you. Because I got into a spirited debate with someone over the January 6th tapes and how Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is releasing said January 6th tapes. Now, it seems to me like all the Democrats don't want these tapes released. Some Republicans don't want these tapes released, and a lot of Republicans do want these tapes released. And I think there's a couple of different things going on. I think that the Democrats were very selective in some of the audio tapes and some of the videotapes that they released as part of the January 6th committee, because they were trying to sell a certain narrative. There's some Republicans that same thing. They're anti-Trump Republicans, and so they used a video to try to get Donald Trump either impeached or so that he would never be able to run for president again, basically to indict Donald Trump. And so they were very selective in the video that they used. But when you start releasing a lot of the footage, the hundreds of thousands of hours of footage, you'll see a completely different narrative. For example, vast majority of these people were allowed into the Capitol, which is something a lot of us knew, but that they were also basically allowed to roam around the Capitol. But there's a lot of Republicans who say that by releasing these tapes, it drags us back to January 6th. It drags us back to that whole conversation that a lot of Republicans have been trying to move away from, which was the allegation, the talking point that the election was stolen, because that takes us away from the epic failures of Donald Trump. But for other Republicans, they say bring on that conversation. And the reason why they say bring on that conversation is because the narrative has always been that the election was not stolen. And so part of this conversation has to be, where do we go from here and what can we learn from the January 6th tapes? You see, I don't believe, at least for me, I don't believe that there is anything that we can learn right now about what happened in the 2020 election. But what I can tell you is that by releasing these tapes and finding out more information about what happened on January 6th, we can actually learn that there is a lot more to that day than meets the eye. Got a lot more straight ahead on this 866-90 Red Eye.
Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios. Now, for Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, here is Dan Mandis.
866-90 Red Eye is the phone number, talking about how Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is releasing the January 6th tapes, and you've got a lot of hand-wringing on both sides. Now, I'm sort of framing this in a number of different ways. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is out there saying now that she is combating disinformation and conspiracy theories. And to me, New York is doing this. In kindergarten through 12th, in the schools, K through 12, in the schools, they're putting together a program so the kids can spot conspiracy theories and disinformation. But as you and I know, because we listen to talk radio, and despite the fact that I've been working in it for 35 years, I'm still somehow a fan of the format, because I love listening to Mark Levin. I love listening to Gary and Eric. I loved listening to Rush Limbaugh. I know all about how some of the things that we as talk show hosts and you and I as talk radio listeners, how the things that we have said have been purported to be conspiracy theories, but, it turned out to be true. So for me, you know what, if I were teaching a class on how to spot disinformation, I would say, well, just, read the Washington Post and the New York Times. There it is right there. But just think about all of this media outrage about Donald Trump trying to overturn the election of 2020 and all that entails. And I would, by the way, remind you, because that's what the media keeps trying to sell you, that Trump was trying to overturn the election of 2020. And again, I will go backwards a little bit and retrace. I'd like to remind you of just a few of the other things the media kept trying to convince you of. That Donald Trump colluded with Russia. That Jussie Smollett was actually attacked on the streets of Chicago at 2 o'clock in the morning by a couple of Donald Trump supporters. That COVID was absolutely not released one way or another from that lab in China. That the laptop from hell was Russian disinformation, and that the vaccines are perfectly safe. Now we know that was most certainly disinformation, because people are seeing side effects, particularly young men with heart issues now they're coming up with. So these are all things that the media have tried to convince you of. And it turns out that we were right. And so now the January 6th tapes. By releasing these tapes, does it open that conversation back to January 6th, and I'm going to air quote this, stolen elections? And we end up not focusing on Joe Biden's failures. There are some people, and I believe that is, if somebody has that opinion, I understand that opinion. But we can all walk and chew gum at the same time. We can, on the one hand, focus on Joe Biden's failures and also talk about what happened on January 6th with a completely different narrative, because the tapes being put out and released gives us more information. It gives us a broader perspective of what happened on that day. Now, you got some people saying, oh, my God, this is so dangerous. How is it dangerous? How is it dangerous watching a bunch of people walk around the Capitol? That's not dangerous. What was dangerous, you could argue, was what was happening beforehand, where you had the Capitol Police really going after some of these folks. And I do understand that there were some people who were attacking the Capitol Police as well. But let's be honest about what happened. Ultimately, the Capitol Police did allow people to come into the Capitol. But there's a bunch of questions here. Why wasn't there more security? Why did the Capitol Police simply let these people in? Why did the Capitol Police, in one video I saw that they high-fived one of the guys that broke in? And I don't really understand that. Some of these other folks ended up with what is really amounted to a guided tour of the Capitol. And then they were later charged, by the way. Who was Ray Epps? What did he do? Who did he work for? Why has he never been charged when others have been charged who did very little? There's a lot of people who say that Ray Epps was working with the FBI as some sort of an informant and embedded amongst the January 6ers. And it's been said that he is one of the, I'm going to put this in air quotes, instigators who said, all right, everybody, time to file into the Capitol building. And so that's one of those big questions. Did the FBI have agents planted inside the Capitol grounds on January 6th? Now, remember when FBI Director Christopher Wray was asked about all of this, and he, of course, as you can imagine, denied it.
Did the FBI have confidential human sources embedded within the January 6th protesters on January 6th of 2021?
Well, Congressman, as I'm sure you can appreciate, I have to be very careful about what I can say about when
even now, because that's what you told us 2 years ago.
May I finish? About when we do and do not, and where we have and have not used confidential human sources. But to the extent that there's a suggestion, for example, that the FBI's confidential human sources or FBI employees in some way instigated or orchestrated January 6th, that's categorically false.
Well, you know, again, I don't mean to belabor the point, but when Christopher Wray says that that allegation is categorically false, well, there's a lot of other things that the FBI has said been categorically false that turned out to be true. How many different issues have they had? Why don't I believe Christopher Wray? Well, because let's face it, they obtained FISA warrants using information on the dirty dossier as the justification for those warrants. And they knew that the information in the dirty dossier was suspect, to say the least. But they got the warrants and they renewed those warrants, spying on the Donald Trump campaign. And again, knowing that the dirty dossier was full of a bunch of BS. So, no, I don't believe Christopher Wray. Now, I'm not going to automatically say that the FBI did or did not have agents embedded inside the Trump crowd on January 6th. But you ask me if I believe the FBI automatically? No. You know, you see these guys and they come in and, you know, they're puffy chested, you know, their chests are out and they're proud of the great work that the FBI does, the men and women of the FBI does day in and day out. And absolutely, the rank and file of the FBI do a lot of really good work. But I also know that there's a lot of questions regarding the behavior of the FBI, particularly the top brass.
Did you have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol on January the 6th prior to the doors being opened?
Again, I had to be very careful.
It should be a no. Can you not tell the American people no? We did not have confidential human sources dressed as Trump supporters positioned inside the Capitol.
Gentleman's time has expired.
You should not read anything into my decision not to share information.
Director Ray,
confidential human
gentleman's time has expired.
Well, and again, he says that that allegation is categorically false, that the FBI instigated this whole thing or were engaged in this whole thing in any way. What about the FBI colluding with social media companies to remove posts from users who had differing opinions on COVID and lockdowns and so forth? Because that is absolutely what the FBI did. How about the same FBI who reached out to social media companies, again, warning about Russian disinformation on the horizon, setting the table for the denial that Hunter's laptop was a real and credible story? And the FBI knew that that story was credible. The FBI knew that that story was real. But they went to the social media companies and they said, be on the lookout for this kind of Russian disinformation. It's exactly what they did. And the FBI is part of the DOJ, and they called parents who had an issue with progressive school boards domestic terrorists. So, you know what, Christopher Wray? I don't believe you. I don't believe you for a second. So you can proudly talk about all that the FBI accomplishes, and I understand that. But the reality is that the FBI has has done a lot of things wrong and has been very dishonest with the American people. 866-90 Red Eye is the phone number. Bill is calling from Los Angeles on Red Eye Radio. Bill, how are you?
How you doing, Dan?
I'm good. Go ahead.
Yeah, but when I was in Columbia J School back in the 80s, I was thinking recently, what if we had found out from a congressional committee that Ronald Reagan's son was doing business with the communist Chinese, and that a Chinese company had mailed or wired $240,000 directly to Ronald Reagan's house in Santa Barbara? I'm thinking, how would the media have reacted to that? And yet, here we've got a congressional committee documenting that $240,000 was mailed from a Chinese government front company directly to Joe Biden's house in Delaware, and his son or his other family members got $5 million after an extortion letter was sent by Hunter Biden claiming that his dad was sitting right beside him and you better send the money.
Yep.
I mean, we're living in an alternate media reality that these things are routinely called conspiracies by media hacks and by Democrat hacks. And I'm thinking, no. If this had been Donald Trump or Ronald Reagan, this would have been a game changer.
Well, it would have been, and you're absolutely right. And you know what's interesting, Bill? I think part of this, and you having your journalism background, you can certainly relate to this. I think part of this is the media counts on an ignorant American people because they don't delve into the details, and they'll accept the media's narrative on a lot of these different stories. Because while you very well laid out part of what is going on with Hunter Biden, James Biden, Joe Biden, China, CEFC, the whole thing, the majority of the American people, they don't take the time, they don't have the bandwidth, I'm sorry to say, to care enough to go into those details. And I think that is why it is so important that talk radio does, and I, of course, do it, and Gary and Eric do it as well. And a lot of the voices that talk radio has on the air do delve into these topics because we are doing what the media simply won't, and the American people won't, which is go into these topics in depth because you can't deny the money trail. You just can't. And so the more that the media denies that this is a reality, the more that, many Americans refuse to follow the money, the more important it is that we do get to the bottom of these things and talk about these things. But that is exactly the kind of thing that the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, is trying to keep silent with their whole thing with trying to crack down on disinformation. And for that reason, it is critically important that you call out governors like Kathy Hochul. And Bill, I appreciate the call. 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis here on Red Eye Radio.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90-RED-EYE.
Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE. I want to get to Patricia very quickly, and she is listening to us in Washington, D.C., the belly of the beast. Hey, Patricia, how are you?
Well, I'm good, and I'm glad. I want to talk about Joe Biden's cognitive mental health. And also, First Lady Jill Biden, she praised Rosalynn for her work on behalf of mental health. Well, Jill Biden knows that Joe Biden is not cosmically well, and yet she's conning us. I mean, she's known he wasn't well since 2018-19, the first primaries. He's 100 times worse now. In fact, the people around him know. And this is not just gaslighting. This is a crime on the voting people. He should not be in there, and she should be shamed publicly for doing this. In fact, some people should be in jail.
Well, it's funny. You know, it's funny, Patricia. I will say this: your opening statement was that Joe Biden was conning America. Trust me when I say, Patricia, no one believes. I don't care what Joe Biden says. No one believes that Joe Biden is fit to be president.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One. Now, it's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis. This is Red Eye Radio.
Appreciate you listening, and the phone number is 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. You've probably been hearing during the news that there has been some progress in the situation, the war between Israel and Hamas. They have apparently reached a temporary truce. Apparently, there's going to be no more fighting for, I think, about 5 days. There's going to be some hostages that are going to be released, including apparently 3 Americans as well. So that is most certainly good news. And by the way, it should be noted to you folks who are pro-Hamas, Israel has agreed to this ceasefire so that they can do what they can to not only get some hostages back, but also so that humanitarian aid can get into the area as well. So that is part of the news cycle this morning, and certainly good news. And by the way, I want to play you some audio. I don't know how big of a deal this is to you, but to me, Susan Sarandon, of course, you know that she's a flaming liberal. I want you to know that I'm a huge proponent of free speech. And because I'm a huge proponent of free speech, then there are times when people, you know, during my job, people will say, don't play that audio. Don't play that audio. They have no right to say that. Susan Sarandon has every right to say some of the most, you know, horrific statements about Israel that you can possibly hear, which is exactly what she did. I guess this was some point in the last 24 hours where she took to the streets. I believe it was in New York. And she talked about the plight of the Palestinian people at the hands of Israel. Listen.
You don't have to be Palestinian to stand with the Palestinian people. You do not have to be Palestinian to understand that the slaughter of almost 5,000 children is unacceptable and a war crime.
Yeah, so this is Susan Sarandon. She said a lot of things, and one of the things that she said was that, quote, Jews are getting a taste of what it feels like to be Muslim. Now, in the soundbite that you just heard, you'll notice she didn't say anything about the atrocities of October 7th. Not one word. She's just focused on the atrocities she says that Israel is committing. Oh, there's more.
I stand here in my cruelly given white privilege.
Did you hear what she just said? The audio's not great, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to play it, but she says, I stand here with my cruelly granted white privilege. And that's what she said.
I stand here in my cruelly given white privilege to say that you don't have to be Palestinian to stand with the Palestinian people.
Yeah, she also talked about how Israel is committing war crimes.
You do not have to be Palestinian to understand that the slaughter of almost 5,000 children is unacceptable and a war crime.
Wow. So, I do find it interesting because you have what's happening on college campuses. You have what's happening, all across the country with these, what I will say is anti-Semitic, and I think a lot of people do, these anti-Semitic rallies and demonstrations from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What that means is the erasure of the Jewish people, genocide. That's what that means. And so you can sit here and you can say, well, not everybody is chanting that at those rallies. But if you're at a rally and they're chanting that, or they've got signs that say that, then you are, by and large, supporting what the people at the rally are also supporting. I wouldn't dream of going to, for example, a KKK rally, because I don't stand for those values. But Susan Sarandon and a lot of these other folks in Hollywood, although I believe, I don't know, I'm maybe over my skis on this one, but I believe that the majority of people in Hollywood have not sided with the Palestinian people, or I should say Gaza, or I should say Hamas, really, to be far more precise. I believe that the majority of Hollywood has either been silent on this or they have been, siding with Israel. I believe that Susan Sarandon is an outlier on this one, because I will say that she sounds awfully extreme.
So many people do not understand the context in which this October 7th assault happened.
So is she justifying what happened on October 7th by saying that it needs more context?
So many people do not understand the context in which this October 7th assault happened.
I'll give you some context, Susan Sarandon. There essentially was, I'm not going to say peace, but both sides were keeping their powder dry, if you will, in the 2 years before what happened on October 7th. And what Hamas was doing was they were basically fooling the Israelis by saying, you know what, we just want to work. We just want to come into your country. We want to work. We just, we want to survive. That's what we want to do. And all the while, they were being funded by Iran, and they were plotting this attack with Iran. That's the context. And here's the other thing. When you go into the homes of sleeping innocent people and you kill 12 to 1,400 of them, that is a terrorist attack. And there's no context with which that is a justification. None whatsoever. And so when Susan Sarandon and others, by the way, will talk about how October 7th needs more context, you really don't. There is no context for that. I mean, this was a slaughter. This was a terrorist attack. And the people that were killed had nothing to do with this thousands of years of conflict between these two sides. They're just trying to live their best lives. And they were slaughtered at the hands of these animals. You know, one of the things that I said last week on my local show in Nashville on Super Talk 99.7, I said that I believe that when you see these folks that are arrested for becoming violent, right, these crazed nut job progressives, whatever that you want to call them, that were trying to attack the DNC. You remember this story from, I think it was last week. And, you know, out of 150 protesters who were trying to get into the building and attacking the police and all that kind of stuff, I think only one or two of those people were arrested. But do you know what I think you ought to do with someone like Susan Sarandon? What I think you ought to do to the people who are arrested for doing these kinds of things, trying to attack the DNC and so forth? They should be required to watch the unfiltered, unedited, raw video taken by Hamas as they were slaughtering and butchering babies. As they were slaughtering and butchering innocent people. That should be part of their punishment. And so for someone like Susan Sarandon, I would challenge Susan Sarandon and anyone else to watch that unedited video, to watch that unfiltered, raw video of babies being butchered, of people being slaughtered, of women being raped, and then you tell me that it needs more context. There is no justification for that. Now, Susan Sarandon does have her right to free speech, and it's cost her. I'm going to play the rest of this soundbite, then tell you what has happened now to Susan Sarandon.
So many people do not understand the context in which this October 7th assault happened. They don't understand the history of what has been happening to the Palestinian people for 75 years.
And by the way, here's a little context for you, Susan Sarandon. There have been a lot of people in Gaza who have been killed by Hamas. Just to let you know, with their wayward rockets, as they attempt to fire rockets into Israel, they end up hitting and destroying their own hospitals and killing their own people. Here's a little more context for you, Susan Sarandon. Hamas is using these people that you purport to care so much about as human shields. Didn't see that in your little speech. And now she has lost her agent. Susan Sarandon, even though I support her right to free speech, and I'm going to tell you something, friends, it is really hard to support the free speech of somebody, quite frankly, so dumb and so completely out of touch with reality. But she does have her right to free speech. She does have her right to tell people how absolutely, tell America and the world how absolutely clueless she is. And now Susan Sarandon has lost her agent, the agency that handles whatever agents do for these types of actors and actresses and so forth. We'll see what else happens to Susan Sarandon as far as that goes. I don't want any harm to come to Susan Sarandon, but for the love of all that is holy, I mean, geez, I can't. She talks about more context, yet she doesn't put what is happening right now in context with human shields and with the wayward rockets that are fired from Hamas and some of these other terrorist organizations inside Gaza, and how they end up going, askew and end up taking out hundreds or thousands of people in Gaza, and Israel gets the blame. We see that over and over and over again. 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-90-RED-EYE. And I want to say hello to, let's see who we have. Lawrence has been holding a while, so I'll take him here, calling from Illinois on Red Eye Radio. Go ahead, Lawrence.
Yes, good show, Dan. Hey, you asked a while back what our impression of the January 6th was. There was a little video released. I call it Nancy and Chucky's show. I guess Nancy's daughter just happened to be there, and Nancy and Chucky were hunkered in the bunker. Yeah. And Nancy got up and she's swinging her arms around. I'm going to punch Donald Trump. I want him to come here. And I thought, well, that was, you talked about the free speech. I'm glad I got to see that little piece of free speech, to see how normal people in Congress are supposed to act. And I thought it was good, especially living here in the People's Republic of Illinois, that I even got to see that. But like I say, you have got a great show, and I love the way you produced it. So my hat's
thank you.
off to you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. I do appreciate it. You're talking about how Nancy Pelosi wanted to punch Donald Trump in the face. I think if you ask Donald Trump how his response would be, I think Donald Trump would say, "Go ahead, make my day." And I appreciate the call, Lawrence. 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Appreciate the kind words as well. Got a lot more straight ahead. Dan Mandis here on Red Eye Radio.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
$866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number. 866-907-3339. People reacting to the Susan Sarandon audio, saying they've been triggered by her audio. If you think the Susan Sarandon audio was bad, you wait till we come back from the next commercial break, because Joe Scarborough had a thing or two to say about Donald Trump, and I'm going to play that for you as well, because this is a guy who has absolutely no idea what he's talking about when he tries to lay down the foundation for an argument that Donald Trump is fascist. Your calls right now, though, at 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. I want to say hello to, this is Tom, calling from Spring Valley, California. Hey, Tom, how are you?
Dan, listen, I'm going to get straight to it. In 1974, in August, I was embarrassed for this country, for what we had put a sitting president through, for a simple 18 and a half minutes of missing audio from tapes. And I'm going to tell you something. $224, $1,000 is a whole lot worse than an 18 and a half minute gap in a tape over a simple placement of bugs in the White House, I beg your pardon, in the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And it's disgusting to me that we ever had to do that and then turn around and have guys like this one who's collecting money from communist countries and padding his pocketbook with the money.
Well, a couple of things, just sticking with Joe Biden for now. I mean, when you look at the list of things that he is impeachable for, I mean, there's an abundance of them. First of all, he's not the first politician, of course, to lie to the American people. But when he was on the campaign trail and he said that his son has not made money from China or any of these other countries, when it is clear that not only did Hunter make money, but that the president was involved in that, and the American people know that. So that's number one. Number two, you're right. I believe that Joe Biden is compromised, and I think that is should be a very big part of the conversation. And there is, at least to me, clear evidence that the president is compromised. All you have to do is look at Chinese President Xi Jinping and his trip to San Francisco a few days ago. and how the president refused to call out President Xi Jinping from China on a multitude of issues. I mean, I believe that is part of the evidence that Joe Biden is compromised, because this is a Chinese president, Xi Jinping, who absolutely has blood on his hands. And for this president to welcome Xi Jinping into our country, on our soil, after his country's fentanyl has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, not to mention the theft of our intellectual property, not to mention all the other things that China has done to weaken America. Do I need to go through COVID again?
I don't think you do.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I think I'm triggering myself, friends. Very quickly, let's say hello to Warren in Scottsdale, Arizona, on Red Eye Radio. Hey, Warren.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm okay.
I just wanted to bring up, I really love your show, first of all. I just want to let you know that. And the second thing I wanted to let you know is I saw on Newsmax today you were bringing up the whole thing about that there was, maybe no evidence about whether the FBI was embedded, and Chris Wray was basically trying to lie, basically say there was nobody there. But they showed a video today on Newsmax, and it basically showed them this. It had not only video but audio. And they actually had they were FBI agents that were discussing Trump and basically what they're going to do with the Trump supporters, bringing them in and stuff. And they were hiding their badges. They showed them wearing Trump gear and everything, with Trump hats and everything else. And they said that they were going to be leading them into the building and stuff like that. And they have them on audio. They actually had a video today that I saw of that. The second thing.
Well, oh, shoot. I'm sorry. I accidentally hung up on him. Call me back. I want to hear your second thing. I also want to find that video that Newsmax has found amongst the newly released January 6th tapes. Thanks for calling in. Call back if you would.
Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios. Now, for Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, here is Dan Mandis.
866-90 Red Eye, 866-907-3339. I forgot the guy's name that called earlier, but he was talking about some Newsmax audio and video that apparently they have uncovered from these January 6th tapes, where it purports to show that the FBI did have some of their agents embedded with these Donald Trump supporters as they were in the Capitol building. I'm looking for the link. And by the way, if you see the link and if you're listening, I told the guy to call back. I accidentally hung up on him. I'm very technologically challenged, so I accidentally hung up on him. But if he's still listening and wants to call back, I'll get him right on. But if you know the link, again, I'm on Newsmax. I'm looking for this audio. My email address is dan@997wtn.com. That is the radio station that I'm on Monday through Friday in Morning Drive, 6 to 10 Eastern. And you can listen to that at 997wtn.com. We are also, if you want to watch the radio show, you can on Facebook or at the website, 997wtn.com, or on YouTube. Joe Scarborough, very quickly, he was on MSNBC, and he is trying to make the claim, and it's a familiar claim, of course, that Donald Trump is fascist. And so some guy from the, some egghead, I would say, from the New York Times, it's such an easy argument to make for the Democrats. Donald Trump is fascist. Donald Trump is Hitler. All of his supporters or all of his followers, they're nothing but a bunch of Nazis, right? I mean, we've been hearing this for years. And so Scarborough, I don't know when this was. I think it was on today's Wednesday, right? So I think it was on Tuesday morning. He starts talking about how Donald Trump is fascist, and he lays out all of the arguments from this egghead in the New York Times who is trying to purport step by step, one by one, how Donald Trump is a fascist. And so here's what Joe Scarborough had to say.
There's a difference between conservatism, radicalism, and fascism. This is fascism. This is the Times quotes an expert on the topic. Fascism is generally understood, and this is boilerplate stuff, really, for what fascism is. Fascism is generally understood as an authoritarian, far-right system of government in which hyper-nationalism is a central component. Check.
Okay, so I'm going to do these one by one. He says hyper-nationalism is a component of fascism, and he's saying that Donald Trump was, hyper-nationalistic, I suppose. So here's what I would say to that. If wanting a secure border, this is like a memo to Joe Scarborough. If wanting a secure border is somehow indicative of fascism, I think that is absolutely insane, because that's what Donald Trump wanted. He simply wanted a secure border. And seeing as what we have seen under the regime of Joe Biden with his open border policies, it is clear that Donald Trump was correct in wanting a secure border. And by the way, he also wanted the immigration system fixed in this country, because he said many, many, many times that we need legal immigration in this country. And most conservatives, by the way, will tell you that. But we need to fix the immigration system by and large, but we do need to secure our border. So for Joe Scarborough to say, oh, well, being, hyper-nationalistic, that is a sign of fascism. No, it's really not. Wanting to protect Americans from Chinese espionage and intellectual property theft, which is something that Donald Trump was very passionate about. And I'm very passionate about that as well. Am I a fascist? Am I a Nazi? No. I'm an American who's looking out for my country because we are getting ripped off by China. And so wanting to protect yourself and your country is now somehow fascist, according to Joe Scarborough? Okay, Joe. That's not hyper-nationalism. That's smart. Oh, but what about the Muslim ban? Yeah, it wasn't a Muslim ban. What Donald Trump did, and you know this because I spoke about this the last time I filled in for Gary and Eric. If it was truly a Muslim ban, then Donald Trump would have banned Muslims from all of those other Muslim majority countries, but he didn't. And by the way, it wasn't a ban, it was a pause. And Donald Trump put a pause on people coming in from countries where there were a lot of people who were incredibly anti-American and calling for violence against America. Is that hyper-nationalistic? Or is that simply smart, Joe Scarborough?
It also features a cult of personality around a strongman leader. Check.
No. Let's talk about this a little bit. A cult of personality around a strong leader. Well, let's talk about that for a second. Because while Joe Biden is certainly not strong, this is a president who, when he was running for president and now as president, although it's not so much lately, who was absolutely protected by the media in any number of different ways. So I could say that there is also a cult of personality, and I'm going to get to the whole, Donald Trump is a cult of personality example in a second. But when it comes to Joe Biden, when you look at how this guy has been protected by the media and how the Democrats will, not as much lately, but in the beginning, the Democrats absolutely ignored so many of Joe Biden's flaws. So who's more of a cult of personality? And don't even get me started on Obama. Now let's talk about Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump a cult of personality, example, whatever? Or are people responding to the fact that Donald Trump stood up to Washington, D.C., exposed the mainstream media, exposed what was going on, triggered so many people in the media, in the Republican Party, and in Washington, D.C., on both sides of the aisle. And so here was a guy that was speaking directly to America like no politician really had ever done before. That doesn't make him a cult of personality. That makes him real. And you look at the 4 years that Donald Trump was in office, it was real good. When you talk about a lack of wars across the world, we weren't involved in any wars. You can look at the border, which was by and large, generally speaking, under control. The economy was doing well as well. And so what Joe Scarborough calls a cult of personality, at least to me, people are responding not to his personality, but to the things that he did for America. There are things that Donald Trump does and did that made me facepalm. But at the same time, I recognized that a lot of the things that he did during his first 4 years in office were really good things for the American people. So, no, Joe Scarborough, that's not a check.
The justification of violence or retribution against opponents. Check.
No. The justification of retribution against opponents. Didn't Joe Biden's FBI and Department of Justice go after conservatives? Yeah, they did. And by the way, didn't Obama go after conservatives and reporters? Didn't Obama do that? So aren't the Democrats guilty of doing that, of going after political opponents? Because I know that Joe Biden did that. I know that his administration did that. The DOJ going after parents who were concerned with radical, progressive, leftist school boards. Didn't Joe Biden's DOJ and FBI, didn't they go after the free speech of conservatives? Why, yes, Joe Scarborough. Yes, they did. Check. And yeah, Obama went after reporters. And yes, Obama went after conservatives. So Joe Scarborough, the more that he speaks, the more that as I was reviewing this audio, the more I realized that he is actually describing his own party. And by the way, he purports to be a Republican. I don't believe that he is.
And the repeated denigration of the rule of law. Check.
No, the denigration of the rule of law. What about our immigration laws, Joe Scarborough? Doesn't Joe Biden denigrate our immigration laws, the rule of law? Of course he does. So if you want to use that as some sort of a check against Donald Trump, which I don't agree, we could certainly use that as a check against Joe Biden.
Said Peter Hayes, a historian who has studied the rise of fascism. Past fascist leaders appealed to a sense of victimhood to justify their actions. Check.
Nope. Oftentimes, Democrats allow soft on crime policies because they believe laws and sentencing are racist. And that stems from slavery, victimhood, past crimes, and so forth. So for everything that Joe Scarborough says, I can go right back to the Democrat Party, his party. He's not a conservative. He's not a Republican. I can go back to the Democrat Party and Joe Biden and Obama and say the same damn thing. So nice try, Joe.
We're entitled because we've been robbed. We've been victimized. We've been cheated and robbed. Check.
Sounds like a lot of these folks that are breaking into stores and rioting during the Summer of Love in 2020, right? I mean, so you had George Floyd, and he was killed by that police officer. And so you had all these people that are rioting all across the country. And what do you see? You know, they feel like they've been robbed. They feel like they've been wronged, and the cops are racist and all this other stuff. And then that is justification for them to break into Best Buy or Target and Walmart and steal a TV, or break into liquor stores and steal a bunch of alcohol and so forth. I don't see Joe Scarborough talking about that.
Check.
No.
Check.
No.
The whining. The snowflakery coming from the Trump people. I mean, a snowflake falls on their shoulders and they're victimized.
Oh, my God. He is such an idiot. Do you remember when Donald Trump was sworn in as president and you had these progressives out there in Washington, D.C.? No. Remember that whole thing? I mean, that's the snowflakery on the left. I mean, I realize now we're just kind of being silly, because he's pointing fingers at us, and I'm conservatives, and I'm pointing a finger right back at him. But, I mean, my Lord, if you want to talk about snowflakery, Joe Scarborough, just look at your party, the Democrats, because, no, you purport to be a Republican. You're not.
They're victimized by history books on Hank Aaron. They're victimized by kids' books on Roberto Clemente. They're victimized by tweets. They're victimized.
Oh, they're victimized by tweets. Oh, please. The Democrats and the people that hated Donald Trump, they were apoplectic when it came to Donald Trump and his tweets. So Joe Scarborough, I mean, he can say what he wants. He can do what he wants. It's a free country. But I would not so respectfully suggest to Joe Scarborough that you might want to look at yourself and your own party, the progressives, because you're not a Republican, before you start throwing stones at Donald Trump and his supporters. 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis here. This is Red Eye Radio.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90-RED-EYE.
Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. I am scanning and scouring Newsmax and their website looking for this link that a guy had mentioned to me that proves that the FBI was embedded within the J6ers. I have not found the videos, so if you can find it, my email is dan@997wtn.com. I am Dan Mandis, in for Gary and Eric here on Red Eye Radio. I want to take some phone calls in the next hour. That telephone number is 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. There is a couple of stories out there that I do want to get to, including, as I'm on the Newsmax website, Ron DeSantis is, of course, challenging Donald Trump to a Newsmax debate. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more straight ahead. And your calls, 866-90-RED-EYE. It's Red Eye Radio.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One. Now, it's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis. This is Red Eye Radio.
866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Gary and Eric return next Sunday night, Monday morning. I host a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. You can get more information at the website, 997wtn.com, or on social media. I'm on all the socials at Dan Mandis Show. I do find it interesting that you have a lot of people in the Republican Party who are criticizing Donald Trump for not wanting to debate. And I don't believe that there's any reason to debate if you're Donald Trump. You've certainly proven that you can handle the job of being a president of the United States. So I will say this. If I'm advising Donald Trump, which the last thing that he wants to do is take advice from me. But what I would say is you don't have to debate because, quite frankly, you have 4 years in office. You've presented your case to the American people in your experience in the 4 years that you were president. But I also disagree with President Trump because he is saying that the remaining debates, and I've seen the headlines. I'm just going to sort of comment on this sort of generically. He says that the Republican Party needs to be sort of reformed or reorganized if these debates continue because the debates should not continue because it is clear that the Republican Party wants him as the nominee. I also disagree with that. So on the one hand, I'm agreeing with Trump on one thing and disagreeing with him on another. Because DeSantis was out there saying that he wanted to debate Trump, and Trump is basically saying, nah. Here's the thing, though. When Donald Trump says, well, we need to reorganize the Republican Party and these debates should not be happening. Well, there's other reasons to debate. I mean, you're looking at who's left, right? It's Nikki Haley. It is Ron DeSantis. I think that it's Vivek Ramaswamy. And I can't remember who else is left. Tim Scott dropped out and the other folks dropped out as well. But here's the thing, is that there's other reasons for these folks to debate. I do understand that it is a presidential primary, for the Republican Party. But there's cabinet choices that the president, if Donald Trump is the nominee and if he's the eventual winner, we don't know. But if he does eventually win, then he could pick any one of those folks for a cabinet position. I think Vivek Ramaswamy would be absolutely epic as a press secretary for Donald Trump. I think that even though he swears that if he ends up, losing, that he's going to go back to the private sector, that's what Vivek Ramaswamy says. I think he would want to become press secretary just because it would be fun. I think that would be one of the more epic examples of an administration, a presidential administration, putting someone in a position just as a big middle finger to the media that would be covering it. I think that would be great. But, I don't believe that. I think that Ronna McDaniel has to go. I would say that. I would absolutely agree with that assertion. But as far as all of these debates go, I think you do continue to have these debates because that is how the party does need to operate. And by the way, the more that these debates go on, the better Donald Trump looks. So there's that aspect to it as well. And I do understand, and I said this earlier, I always have to give this disclaimer. I am a free agent. So I'm not out here, on the radio. Donald Trump can do no wrong, all those kinds of things. No, I'm a free agent. If I decided that for whatever reason Donald Trump wasn't my guy, I would go with perhaps Ron DeSantis. But right now, I'm a free agent. And I liked Tim Scott a lot. I like Vivek Ramaswamy, but there's some things about him that I have disagreed with. And, so far, I like where Donald Trump is going. I like that this is a president who had a good 4 years in office. And if you think about it, I mean, with all the different ways that he was attacked, impeached, investigated, I don't need to tell you what happened in those 4 years. He really was operating with one hand tied behind his back. Imagine what he could do with another 4 years. 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number. Some folks have been waiting a long time, so I want to get to you. Paul, listening in Houston. Paul, thanks for calling Red Eye Radio. How are you?
I'm doing all right, Dan. Appreciate you getting to my call. I think it's important that these January 6th tapes get out for the American public to see. Mm-hmm. Because one thing is, the shaman that supposedly was a ringleader.
Yeah.
After, when Tucker Carlson reviewed, put out the only tape that he put out, which showed the shaman being escorted around the Capitol by police, like a tour, that his sentencing was reviewed and reduced because he was made to look like evil incarnate, according to January 6th, and according to the prosecutors, and I saw something on another show this week about a young man named Pratow. Jason was his first name. His mom talked about him, that he was up there. It showed a similar tape with him being escorted by police, just walking around taking pictures, not harming anyone or anything.
Well, and that's
and
Paul,
he was arrested.
Hey,
Anyway,
Paul,
I
will say, Paul, I will say this, and I appreciate the call. You're right. There's a lot of January 6ers. We got a guy here in Tennessee. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. And we got a guy in Tennessee. His name is Stuart Parks. And he ventured inside the Capitol. But so far, and he's been sentenced to 8 months in prison, and he didn't do anything. He walked in. He didn't threaten anybody. He, as far as I know, he didn't vandalize anything. But the judge, and I forget the judge's name, but the judge who Stewart went in front of, and this is a guy that I've interviewed, and this is a guy who, I'm telling you, Paul, would not hurt a fly. And he has been sentenced to 8 months in federal prison for literally just walking into the Capitol. That's what's happening. That's what's happening. And they're being held in absolutely horrible positions. And in conditions, I should say. And so, yeah, this is something that is going to continue to reverberate. And if and when Donald Trump ends up back in the White House, one of the things that Donald Trump has said, because the question has been asked, okay, so if you end up back in the White House, will you pardon the January 6ers, Paul? This is what Trump has been asked. And I like what Trump had to say. What Donald Trump said is it's got to be on a case-by-case basis, because if one of these January 6ers actually did attack a Capitol police officer, then he has to face consequences. But if somebody just basically trespassed into the Capitol and that's it, that is not an 8 months in a federal prison kind of crime. And, Paul, I really appreciate your call very much. Let's say hello to this is David in Watsonville, California. David, you're on Red Eye Radio. Thank you for calling.
I love it when you're on all the time. Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to also speak about Sarandon, if I may, but first I called about the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
Mankind, as the Wizard of Oz suggests, has an inclination or an urge to let Big Brother take over so he can just relax and let the government make all its decisions. And I think the FBI is falling into this trap, like we know better than the public, and you need us to make decisions for you. And it's very ominous what I'm seeing with our government. But if I may speak about Sarandon, may I?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, no doubt her publicity company that dropped her was controlled by Jewish people, like most of L.A. and most of Hollywood is. And if I was in Sarandon's shoes, I would say that's another thing. You know, we got Elon Musk's rocket blowing up the same week he criticized Israel, and now I'm getting dropped. And we have another matter to think about here in America, folks. In other words, she could turn this being blackballed into a whole new issue that I think America needs to hear. Because if you really think about the Israeli situation, they're a goat on a post that the powers that be put there to foment war so we can commit the Crusades all over again and find excuses to kill Islamists.
Okay, so I'm trying to follow. So, a couple things. As far as Susan Sarandon goes, she has a right to say what she wants, and if her publicity company, if her agents decide to drop her, that is their decision. I don't know if her agency is run by Jewish folks or not. It is possible that her comments were so incredibly insulting to the vast majority of the American people that they just decided this is not someone that we want to work with because we have such incredible, what's the right way to put this? we disagree with her so much on her stance on Israel versus, Hamas. And so there's that part of it as well. And so, David, I appreciate the call. As far as the war between Israel and Hamas, I feel like I've talked that to death. But what I would say is that for me, October 7th, and this is kind of where I land on this. October 7th was, to me, really the start of a whole new battle between Hamas and the Palestinians and Israel. And the reason why is because that was such a brutal attack. That was such a senseless attack. That was an attack that was an attack on babies. That was an attack on innocent people. And so I feel like regardless of what happened before October 7th, what happened on October 7th was so beyond the pale, was so incredibly horrific, was so incredibly, there's no other way to say it. I mean, it was another day of genocide for the Israelis. And so to me, regardless of what happened in the past, despite what Susan Sarandon would say, there is no context and there is no justification for what happened on October 7th. Now, Rashida Tlaib and some of the folks that are out there that are anti-Israel, they will be okay with these attacks. I played the audio of Susan Sarandon where she said that the attacks on October 7th need more context. There is not any amount of context that will justify what Hamas did. And that's why she was dropped. Because I think that there's a lot of people who feel like what she said was just so incredibly horrific. Steve is in Casa Grande, Arizona, on Red Eye Radio. Steve, how are you?
Hey, doing pretty good. You know, this reminds me of that. Remember that Laurel and Yanni thing where one person would hear Laurel and another one would hear Yanni? That's what reminds me of when you have a Republican and a Democrat, because I'm Republican, and what I see with Joe Biden is a complete dereliction of duty. Just when he first started office and opened up the border, brought in the fentanyl, changed our energy policies so that we had this rapid inflation from that, and then we also now the interest rates and just a complete mess. And then and that's what I see as a Republican, but a Democrat sees a complete opposite thing, and I just can't just like the Laurel and Yanni. Like when I hear Laurel and somebody else hears the exact same thing, but they hear Yanni, it's the same thing. It's like I'm seeing one thing, but a Democrat is seeing something completely different.
Well,
it's mind-boggling.
And Steve, what I would say is I don't believe the Democrats are that stupid. Like, I believe that they know that the border is a complete mess. They know that fentanyl coming into our country is a complete mess, and it is something that absolutely prove that their policies are disastrous. They also know that Joe Biden is not well. He's not all there cognitively speaking. However, to admit all of, but if I may, Steve, for the Democrats to admit all of those things that I just mentioned, that would mean that Donald Trump and the Republicans and conservatives were right, and the Democrats are not about to admit that. And last thing I'll say, Steve, is that for the Democrats and for the Biden administration, they know that the American people are horrified as far as what's going on the southern border. But what the Biden administration is trying to do is they're trying to import a completely new voting bloc. And so they're letting Joe Biden take the political bullet for that, because for them, the greater good is to have all of these, eventually these folks will be given the opportunity to vote through amnesty and so forth. And their thinking is that these people will all vote Democrat. And I very much appreciate the call. Steve, 866-90 Red Eye. Dan Mandis here. This is Red Eye Radio.
Brought to you by Hot Shot Secret.
Hi, I'm Jen Loomis, a transport safety expert at J.J. Keller, and I'm here to share a tip on roadside inspections. Roadside inspections all begin with the driver interview. during which the officer will gather basic information from the driver and prepare the driver for the inspection. The officer will also be evaluating the driver, determining if the driver can speak English, is under the influence of anything, has an illness, or is fatigued. The officer will ask the driver for required documents, including vehicle and driver credentials, the driver's log, and shipment paperwork. The officer may also conduct a vehicle inspection. Before beginning the inspection, the officer will take steps to make sure the inspection can be done safely. These include chalking the wheels, wearing personal protective equipment, and explaining what will be required of the driver. The driver needs to pay close attention to these instructions so that the vehicle inspection can be conducted in a manner that is safe for the inspection official. This tip was brought to you by J.J. Keller & Associates. Visit us at jjkeller.com.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
Eight 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. I want to say hello to Andy in Butler, Pennsylvania on Red Eye Radio. Hey, Andy, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for taking my call. I had one point, now I got two, and I'll try to be quick. You're talking about Mr. Scarborough. You actually gave examples. He didn't. He just said things, but he could give no examples. You actually gave examples to show how when he's talking about that, he's really talking about what Democrats do.
Yeah.
And the other point I had is just simply this. I've heard about the deal to release hostages. What I haven't heard the American news media do or seem to be interested in at all is exactly how many hostages does Hamas have and what are their names? And why hasn't that been the question asked every day whenever they do press briefings to the press secretary?
Right.
Who are these Americans, and do we have proof that they're alive? And I think the reason why the American media won't ask the questions, I'm going to call it the Jimmy Carter effect.
Okay.
Because they're afraid if they ask about hostages and make Joe Biden look even sillier than he is, it's going to hurt him come the election. So they ignore it.
Andy,
they don't think about hostages.
Well, I appreciate the call. I think part of what's going on is I don't know if they know who the hostages are, to be honest with you. Now, in the news this morning, and by the way, I don't know if there is a way, Andy, for Joe Biden to look worse. Probably there is. Gosh, let's not go down that road, because there always is a way for Biden to look worse. But what I would say is the good news is we do have, apparently, out of these 50 hostages that are about to be released, 3 are American hostages. So that is very good news. And Andy, I appreciate the call, and I also appreciate the kind words. 866-90-RED-EYE coming up next. I cannot wait to tell you what is going on in Portland. It is all straight ahead on Red Eye Radio.
Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios. Now, for Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, here is Dan Mandis.
866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. You can follow me on the socials at Dan Mandis Show. Opioids continue to destroy America. And Portland has learned their lesson big time because, these soft on crime policies by the Democrats, they really do destroy communities. And so there's a story on Fox News. Here's part of the story. It's a longer story, but I'm going to focus on the part where the people of Portland are now demanding change, a change back to before they were soft on crime. From Fox News, headline, Oregon opioid deaths increase 13 times after drug decriminalization act. And that is what they did. They decriminalized drug usage. And so now it is the scourge of drugs in Portland has just, it keeps going up. It is skyrocketing. As Oregon reaches the 3-year anniversary of passing its trailblazing law decriminalizing hard drugs like heroin, meth, and cocaine, death and devastation are pushing many to plead for its reversal. Because that's what happens. You know, everybody thinks, oh, yeah, let's be, let's have laws that are, more sympathetic and empathetic. And let's not send these people to jail. Let's send them to, some sort of drug rehab. Well, what happened in Oregon is they passed Measure 110. 58% of the people there approved it. But here's the problem, is they didn't have the ability to treat all of the people that had the drug problems. So they didn't go to jail. They didn't have the health facilities set up. And so they just ended up not dealing with the drug problems at all. And so now what that's done is the drug usage and the deaths have skyrocketed in Oregon. According to an August poll, by the way, these numbers real quick, opioid deaths in Oregon have skyrocketed to 955 this year. That is up from 280 in 2019, before the law, Measure 110, was passed. So I'm going to go through that again. Before the law was passed in 2019, they had 280 deaths. This year, 955. That's 13 times higher. According to an August poll from Emerson College, a 56% of Oregonians, that's a majority, now support overturning the law, which made possession of some illicit drugs punishable by a maximum of $100, a maximum fine of $100, which can be avoided with a, quote, health assessment, a 24/7 phone service that will help determine what services the person calling might need. But the problem is they couldn't get it set up right. An even larger number of Oregonians, nearly 2/3, supported now repealing parts of this Measure 110 to restore penalties for possessing drugs, according to the poll, while only 36 believed that it should be left as is. I mean, isn't that typical? So you can clearly see that the passage of this Measure 110 has led to an astronomical increase in deaths because they don't really deal with the problem. And so then what happens? The problem gets worse. Yet there's somehow 36% of people that say, no, it's working great. Michael Bach is with law enforcement in Portland, and he told Fox News that these numbers actually don't even tell the whole story.
But I can just tell you from my experience that this breaks my heart. These are what happened before 110 got passed was that I revived 0 people. And since 110's passing, it's almost daily. These are friends. They are brothers, fathers, sisters, cousins. We're talking about the loss of life, and we have to do something different. This is serious.
Yeah, again, that is Michael Bach, and he is with law enforcement in Portland. He was talking to Fox News, and yeah, the numbers don't tell the whole story. By the way, talking about this 110, critics at the time argued the measure was experimental. Remember, this was considered groundbreaking at the time. However, the state was ill-equipped to handle the dramatic change. The bill initially aimed to keep those struggling with addiction out of the prison system by opting for more health services. The problem is they didn't have the appropriate infrastructure to help these folks. And so what happened is I don't know if you want to say they fell through the cracks, but they weren't going to prison and they weren't going to the drug or mental health facilities they needed to go to. And isn't that part of the problem where, you have these do-gooders, no offense to you Democrats, but sometimes, y'all have the dumbest of ideas and you don't think things through. Sometimes people, especially on the left, what they like to do is they like to pass what I call feel-good legislation, but it actually doesn't solve any problems. It makes things worse. America needs to be welcoming. So let's have no border policy whatsoever and just let everybody in. Consequences be damned. And now you've got all these Democrat-run cities like New York who are suffering severe consequences. So it always sounds good, doesn't it? All of these, we need to defund the police after George Floyd. Great sentiment if you're someone on the left. But the reality is that defunding the police has done irreparable harm to Democrat-run cities, major cities, all across America on a number of fronts. Number one is you essentially gave the bad people, the bad guys, the permission to go out and commit crimes. And we are seeing that every single day. And, of course, we have a severe shortage of police in cities all across America as well. Why? Because they've been demonized by people on the left. So you have all of these things that the Democrats do that I think sound good in their minds, but in reality, they don't think things through. And you know who ultimately suffers? Well, in the case of the defund the police movement, it was the cities that they themselves represent. And oftentimes, it was the black community that suffered by the defunding the police movement because that means there's fewer police in those cities. I mean, it's not that hard to figure out. I mean, I guarantee you that Gary and Eric, when that whole defund the police movement was going on, I guarantee they were saying, like I was saying here in Nashville, this will hurt the black community. Doesn't matter. Because defund the police looked great on a hashtag and sounded great as they were protesting through the streets of, you name the Democrat-run city. That is now destroyed because of those policies. It's the same thing here. It is the same thing here in Oregon. Oh, yeah, let's keep those struggling with addictions out of prison, and let's just, send them for more health care services. Do you have the infrastructure? Well, no, but we want to pass it anyway. Oh, okay, why? Because it just sounds good on a hashtag. Okay, well, now you have a bunch of dead people. Congratulations, Democrats, you've struck again. You're crushing it. Going back to this audio from Michael Bach, law enforcement in Portland. One of the things that he said to Fox News is that the people who voted for this law, the Measure 110, their intentions, going back to the intentions, right? Their intentions may have been good, but it was an incredible failure on a lot of different levels. And he did tell Fox News that he doesn't necessarily know why they voted for this in the first place, but unfortunately they did.
I don't know. I haven't spoken to them directly. What I can tell you is that it seems as though they didn't want people who were burdened with addiction to be punished by the criminal justice system. What I think is that right now people need to come together and realize that this is just an incredible burden, an incredible crisis, and that people out here that myself, my coworkers, the rest of my team are interacting with are real. They have families and friends, and whatever that hope was has to be different than what it is now.
Well, and I see what he's saying. Here's part of the problem with the Democrats, and why does this sound like a recurring theme tonight? They don't want to admit when they're wrong. And so you've got what is happening in Oregon, and specifically in Portland. You have what's going on in places like San Francisco, Chicago, a lot of these different places. And if you if you change the law, if you change certain aspects of Measure 110 there in Oregon, then that would be the Democrats admitting that their own policies are destructive and grotesque and has led to the deaths of thousands of people across the country. Does it matter to the Democrats? Well, no, because it looks good on a sign and it looks good on a hashtag. This guy, Michael Bach, last audio bite here, he says that the people who voted to pass this law, it was, something they talked about. 2019 is when all of this came down. They now understand how wrong they were, and this guy, Michael Bach, is hopeful that they will change the law back.
I hope so. I can't tell you, I haven't had conversations or coffee with them, but I'm happy to. I wear my boots out here in Old Town and in downtown Portland, and every day this is a regular occurrence. The people out here who are burdened with this addiction are being cast to the side, and it's really, really heartbreaking. So I can't speak to what others see or do, but I can tell you from boots on the ground, this is tragic, and it's got to change.
It's tragic, it's got to change, and it is deadly. You talk about the policies of the Democrats. I mean, it's not hyperbole to say that their policies are deadly. Paul is in Idaho on Red Eye Radio. Paul, thanks for calling in. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. This is a subject that strikes really close to home to me, period, as far as that's concerned. I just celebrated 30 years continuous sobriety, and there's been no breaks in it. I feel like I'm the luckiest man in the world.
Congratulations, Paul. That's great.
It's not me doing it. It's a power greater than myself, who I choose to call God, that's doing it for me. And I have to work at it each and every day. There's a lot of things that go on in the recovery process. One is you first have to admit that there's a problem. You don't admit there's a problem, you ain't going to get help, because you're not going to want help. You want to stay sick. And there's a lot of things that happen when you stay sick. People get robbed, people get mugged, people get shot, people get stabbed. You know the list. And it's not solely because of the Dems and the decisions that they make, but the lady over there, when she was a governor, made a horrible mistake in allowing that to happen, to legalize hard narcotics and everything else down the line. They made it legal to be able to do that and to be frisked if necessary when you got pulled over or what have you. If you had narcotics on you, you didn't get arrested.
Well, hey, Paul. Let me ask you, Paul, if I can, as an addict, as a former addict, when you hear that, where it was like, well, we're not going to criminalize this, we're going to send you to, some health services, but the health services weren't set up yet, that clearly would result in more drug use and deaths, right? I mean, obviously.
Absolutely.
All right, Paul, I appreciate the call. Thank you very much. I got to run. I'm late for a break, but congratulations on your sobriety. 866-90-RED-EYE.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90-RED-EYE.
It's Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis here in for Gary and Eric. They return next Sunday night, Monday morning. Now, if you're wondering about me, I host a radio show, a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee on Super Talk, 99.7 WTN, and that is from 6 to 10 Eastern Time. So if you'd like to listen in, feel free at 99.7WTN.com. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as well, where we broadcast the show there via video. Got a whole lot more straight ahead right here on Red Eye Radio.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.